In the life of any country, there are these moments, these turning points that change absolutely everything. Well, for India, one of its biggest came in 1991. It's a story about a nation teetering on a financial cliff edge, a desperate plea for help, and a massive gamble that would completely redefine its future. So let's dive into the story of that gamble. I want you to just think about that question for a second. What does happen? Because this isn't some hypothetical classroom question. This was the terrifying reality staring India right in the face in the summer of 1991. The government was looking into a financial abyss, and the clock was ticking fast. 2 weeks. That's it. That's all they had. By 1991, India's foreign currency reserves, the money it needs to buy stuff from other countries, had dwindled to almost nothing. They had just enough to pay for 2 weeks of essential imports. We're talking fuel, life-saving medicines, crucial machinery. After that, the country would just stop.
So, how did India pull itself back from the brink? Well, that's what we're going to unpack. We'll start with the crisis itself, then look at the dramatic bailout that came with some very serious strings attached. We'll explore the radical new economic playbook that emerged from it, see the mixed results of this whole experiment, and finally, talk about the lasting legacy of 1991.
All right, first things first. Let's get a real handle on just how dire the situation was. This wasn't just a bad quarter or a minor recession. This was a full-blown code red emergency. It was really a perfect storm of problems hitting all at once. Like we said, the foreign exchange reserves were practically empty. But it wasn't just about buying goods. India also couldn't afford to pay the interest it owed on its international loans. It was on the verge of defaulting, which, in the financial world, is a catastrophic failure. It would have shattered its credibility for decades. Okay, so with its back completely against the wall, the Indian government had to do something. It turned to the world's financial emergency services, you could say. But the help they were offering, it wasn't going to be a blank check. It would come at a very steep price. So India went cap in hand to the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, and the World Bank and asked for a massive $7 billion bailout. This was a moment of true desperation, asking the world's biggest lenders to step in and stop a total economic meltdown. Now here's the catch. This is the fine print. The IMF and the World Bank said, okay, you can have the loan, but you have to completely restructure your entire economy. They demanded that India dismantle its old, state-controlled system, throw open the doors to private companies, and tear down the walls that had kept it isolated from the global economy. Agreeing to those terms forced India to adopt what became known as the new economic policy. And it was a truly radical shift in thinking, all built around a simple, powerful acronym, LPG. LPG. It stands for liberalization, privatization, and globalization. These 3 words represented a complete U-turn on the economic path India had been on for more than 40 years. Let's just quickly break down what each one actually means. So first up, liberalization. For decades, Indian businesses had been tangled up in this complex web of licenses and permits known as the license raj. I mean, you wanted to start a factory? You needed a license. You wanted to produce more stuff? You needed another license. It was a nightmare that choked innovation. Liberalization was about cutting through all that red tape and just letting businesses do business. Next up, privatization. Pretty simple, really. This meant shifting economic activity away from clunky, government-owned companies and into the hands of the private sector. The idea was that private companies would be more efficient, more innovative, and just plain better at running things. And finally, globalization. This was all about opening India's doors to the world. It meant letting foreign companies invest and set up shop in India, and it meant letting Indian companies trade and compete on the global stage. The era of economic isolation was officially over. Now, to really get liberalization and globalization, you have to understand what they were built to tear down: trade barriers. These are basically just government rules, like really heavy taxes on imports, that make foreign products more expensive. Why? To protect your local businesses from outside competition. The source we're looking at gives a great, simple example of how this worked. Think about Chinese toys. Before 1991, the government would slap a huge import tax on them. That made those toys way more expensive for Indian families, which helped protect local Indian toy makers. Well, the LPG reforms came in and slashed those taxes, forcing Indian companies to compete on quality and price for the very first time. So the reforms were pushed through. The big gamble was taken. The massive question is, did it actually work? Well, the answer is complicated. The results were powerful, for sure, but they were very much a double-edged sword. I mean, just look at this slide. You can see the two faces of the reform right here. On the upside, foreign money poured into the country. New technologies arrived. Entirely new industries like IT outsourcing were born, creating millions of jobs. It became a consumer's market. But then you look at the downside. Many small local businesses that had been protected for decades just couldn't compete with giant multinational corporations. And all of this led to a sharp rise in economic inequality. This quote really captures the change for the average person perfectly. Before 1991, if you wanted to buy a car, you had like 2 or 3 models to choose from, and you'd probably have to wait years to get one. It was a producer's market. You took what you could get. After 1991, the floodgates opened. Suddenly, there was choice, variety, quality. The customer was finally in charge. So let's just pull back for a moment and look at the big picture. The reforms of 1991 weren't just about tweaking economic policy. They were about fundamentally reshaping India's entire identity on the world stage. At the end of the day, the 1991 reforms were a point of no return. They didn't just fix a temporary crisis, they permanently rewired the country's economic DNA. They turned India from a closed-off, cautious nation into a dynamic and major player in the global economy. The India we see today is in so many ways a direct result of that gamble. And that leaves us with one final and really critical question. The reforms absolutely unlocked India's economic potential and created vast amounts of wealth. But as the country continues its journey as a global powerhouse, the debate still rages on. Did the rising tide of all that growth truly lift all boats? That is the complex and very much ongoing legacy of 1991.